When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
This is The Planted Runner. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic. There's something very curious that happens at the end of virtually any running event, whether it's 100 meters or the marathon. The best athletes the world has ever seen will be giving every drop of energy they have to finish as fast as humanly possible. And yet, the winners rarely collapse to the ground completely spent. They nearly always have enough energy to celebrate their victory. So that means they really didn't use every drop of energy, not even close, or racing would be fatal. Our brains protect us from death by ramping up the perceived effort and slowing down our legs. Well-trained athletes understand how powerful the brain can be in athletic performance, and they actively work on pushing back the brain's mental panic. They learn how to calm their minds while doing hard things and reach performance goals they never could achieve training the body alone. So how can you learn to do the same thing? Let's find out. Welcome to The Planted Runner. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic, and my mission is to help you improve your running, your mindset, and your life with science-backed training and plant-based nutrition. Today, I'd like to devote an entire episode to the mental side of training. If you're a regular listener to the show, you'll know that I do a mental strength minute at the end of each episode to give you one quick mental tip that you can use right away. Some of them will be immensely helpful to shift your mindset, while others might not be your cup of tea, and that's okay. We all have different triggers and issues, and my goal is to provide you with as many tools as I can. Use what works and toss the rest. In this episode, I'll take a more comprehensive approach. You'll learn how to silence the voice that tells you to quit, how to shift away from useless perfectionism, and how to reframe your running goals so you always cross the finish line with a smile. And because this entire episode is all about mental strength, I'm not going to do the mental strength minute at the end, but you know that I'll be back with another one next week to fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. To prepare for this show, I asked the members of my PR team what mental challenges they had and how they learned to overcome them. In case you don't know, the PR team is a group of runners just like you who get custom training schedules, coaching, a private team podcast, and more, all within a supportive community. If that sounds amazing, it is. And you can learn more about the team at theplantedrunner.com/group. The responses the PR team members gave were great, and I'm going to share some of them with you. Lisa, who is preparing for her first marathon this year, said, "My biggest challenge is when I'm having trouble hitting paces. I tell myself I suck at this and it will never get better." Did that one hit home for you? It sure does for me. When you're trying to get better at something that's very hard, like running, you're going to be in a zone of frustration for a while until you finally master it. The frustration only ends when you reach what you were aiming for, and so you aim for something else that's just a little bit harder. And then you're right back to being frustrated until you master that. The magic is learning to stay in that frustrated zone, even embracing it, because it's absolutely necessary for growth. Here's how Lisa learned to deal with it. Thankfully, these negative thoughts are temporary. I recognize them and keep going. It's such a mental game. I'm working on being content with consistency rather than focusing on everything being perfect every time. It's too exhausting to chase paces I'm not ready for yet. Trying to be perfect sucks the fun out of it. And so my advice would be to try to keep the fun alive by not taking it too seriously. Ooh, there is another great lesson from Lisa, and that is avoiding perfectionism. Running tends to attract people who love the binary nature of running. You either hit your time or you don't. You run faster than before or you don't. You run more miles than last week or you don't. You pass or you fail. In reality, improvement in running is not binary. It's actually quite nuanced. Yes, the numbers tell part of the story, but if you're only relying on the numbers for validation in this sport, I promise you that you will soon be deeply disappointed. There's no such thing as perfect in life or in running. There is no perfect training plan, no perfect training, no perfect race. You could do everything perfectly according to plan, and you're still not guaranteed results on race day. So if perfection is a myth, what should we aim for instead? I'll warn you, the perfectionists are not going to like this. It's aim for good enough. The best kind of training is good enough over and over again, not exhausting yourself with the myth of perfection. Now, this is not to say that you shouldn't push yourself. Sometimes hard. You should. You will need to challenge yourself to grow, and that means getting uncomfortable. But the good news is there are actionable ways that you can get more comfortable when things get uncomfortable. And I'll go over those when we come back. The Planted Runner is sponsored by Liquid IV. If you have big running goals this year, you're going to have to create some rituals to make sure you're set up for success. One of mine this year is dialing in my hydration before, during, and after every run or workout. Every morning while I wait for my coffee to brew, I'm grabbing a stick of Liquid IV so my workout hydration is ready to go. Right now, I've got raspberry lemonade stocked up, which almost makes me feel like summer is right around the corner. In each packet, you get 8 vitamins and nutrients, 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, and no artificial sweeteners. And it's non-GMO and, of course, vegan. Make Liquid IV your new ritual this year. Just 1 stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code PLANTED at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code PLANTED at liquidiv.com. Welcome back to The Planted Runner. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic. There's one thing that anyone who's ever tried to run before knows to be true, and that is that running can be very uncomfortable. It certainly shouldn't be all the time, but if you're trying to get better at the sport, you will need to push yourself. And when you do, your brain will push back. So how do you convince it not to freak out? There are many time-tested ways to do that, and I'm going to share some of my favorites. Before I get into this, everything that I will talk about here has to do with effort-based pain. I'm not trying to teach you how to run through a pulled hamstring or a stress fracture. This is all about getting the best out of yourself when the effort gets high, not pushing through injuries. So let's get into it. When we run, there is often an internal argument going on with the desire to push and the desire to stop. Your brain is very protective of the body and relies on you not killing yourself when you go run. So if the brain gets any hint that you are doing something out of the ordinary, it will sound the alarm beginning with negative thought patterns. This hurts, the brain will say. I'm breathing too hard. This is too fast. I can't do this, and on and on and on. The simple way to beat this is by training so well and so carefully that you always run within your ability, which gets better and better with time and with practice, and you never trigger a sense of panic from the brain. You practice running hard, so when it's time to run really hard, your brain is used to it. But let's be real. Most runners race to push ourselves. We want to know how fast we can get from point A to point B, and if we stick with what the brain is happy with, we will never reach our true potential. If racing were easy all the time, much of why most runners race would be lost, and what fun is that? I mean, if a marathon felt as easy as a walk down the block, would it be as interesting? Of course not. But if you are going to push, you will get pushback from your brain. So how do you deal with it? Physically, besides good training, making sure you're warmed up before racing can make a huge difference. If you hit the starting line cold and fly out of the gates, your body thinks you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and will flood you with adrenaline. That is a good thing since it will help you run faster, but when the rush is over, the shocked brain will be ready to calm down and slow down. But if you ease into your speed with a good warm-up and a conservative start, the brain gets a heads up, if you will, and says, oh yeah, we're running now. I've done this before. And the chance of the panicked negative talk lessens, or at least gets pushed down the road. Being prepared mentally for the battle ahead is just as important as being physically ready, and some say it's even more important. The first step is to expect that it's coming. You should not be surprised that your brain wants to stop you from doing hard things, and thoughts will arise that will tell you to stop, slow down, take a break. PR team member Amy has a voice that she calls Carl. She has struggled with the feeling of wanting to give up before the race was over, finishing far slower than she's capable of. Now, she says, when the voice says we're done and it's over, I yell, shut up, Carl. Using third person has really helped. And sorry for anyone named Carl. This is very similar to my experience as well. For me, the voice was always very sweet and kind, disguising its true evil. In order to combat this, I gave my voice a name, a personality, and an entire backstory. She's Nancy, a sweet Southern granny that just wants me to slow down and eat some cupcakes with her. You're tired, dear. Why don't you slow down, she says. No one will be upset with you if you slow down, sweetie. Your family will still love you if you quit. Why are you doing this anyway, she asks. It's hard to argue with Nancy because she's right. I am tired and my family will still love me if I don't run my goal time. And when you're tired and you're still running, it's hard to come up with a good argument against such sound logic. So the trick is to prepare ahead of time. I know Nancy is coming along for the ride, but she doesn't get to drive the bus. She is sweet, but she's overprotective. She's kind, but honestly, she's getting in my way. Creating an identity for my negative voice helps me separate it from myself and my true goals and dreams, even though, of course, it is a part of myself. If I make Nancy just another obstacle in the journey, rather than letting her get a say in the decision-making, then it's easier to say, shut up, Nancy, and keep running. My next tip is to remember that feelings aren't facts. You can even use that as a mantra when things get hard in a race and say it over and over and over again to yourself. Feelings aren't facts. Your brain creates feelings, and they are as ephemeral as the clouds on a summer day. Feelings are real, and I'm not saying you're imagining them, but they are creations based on past experience and what your brain is concluding based on perceptions of the facts around you. So when you're running hard, your brain might say, this is hard. And when you say that, you might think, hey, I'm right, this is really hard. And then, yes, this does feel hard. And now it feels even harder. And on the circle of brain chatter goes, a spiral of self-fulfilling prophecy. But if instead, when you think this is hard, you answer, yes, but things will change, just hang on. You're acknowledging while racing is certainly difficult, every fleeting emotion can and will pass. In cases like this, I like to use the mantra, this mile. I forget that I have 25 other miles ahead of me or whatever the distance is left, and I shrink my focus to the mile that I'm running. Nothing else matters. By chanting this mile over and over and over again, there's no room for the two sides of my brain to argue with each other about pushing or pulling back. Arguing, both in running and in life, is exhausting. And I want to use that energy for speed, not a brain battle. If the arguing does get too intense, take the vocabulary away. Instead of allowing your brain to think whole thoughts, reduce your thoughts to numbers and start counting. This tip really works, and lots of runners use it to drown out their noisy brains. I prefer to simply count to 10 over and over again. And the reason I don't go higher is because the rhythms of the lower numbers is easier to time with my steps. 1, 2, 3 is easier to run to than 25, 26, 27, for example. Counting provides a distraction from all the hard work you're doing and helps you forget for a few moments that you're running hard because you're not focusing on everything that hurts. The chatter is limited to a task you learned before kindergarten, so it's deeply familiar to your agitated brain. On the flip side of distraction is hyperfocus, and that can be equally effective in keeping your head in the game. Most runners like to do a head-to-toe form check when things get tough. In one sense, this is paradoxically still a distraction technique since focusing on keeping your head up and your shoulders down and back can help distract you from your screaming quads. But for most people who like this technique, it doesn't feel like a distraction. The attention you are paying to your form physically helps you run more efficiently, which means running hard is less effortful. My next tip is when things are getting too intense inside your head, get out of it. Look around and start playing some mental games with the things and the people around you. Maybe it's picking out a telephone pole and just trying to run your best until that point. Maybe it's seeing the guy in the red hat in front of you and seeing if you can reel him in like a fish and catch him. Or maybe it's breaking into a smile, which is a natural painkiller, by the way, and giving that little kid on the side of the road a high five. Running and racing well does not have to be all about biting the bullet and grimacing your way to the finish line. In fact, relaxing your face eases tension and makes running easier. If you tend to get too tense about things mentally, you're likely to get tense physically too, which costs precious energy, which should be going to your legs. If that's you, think relaxed fast, or something similar as your mantra. Racing your best often involves pushing beyond what you've been trained to do physically. But if you practice some mental coping strategies during your hard days of training, you will be far more prepared for the huge mental challenge on race day. And finally, my last tip is probably the most important one. That is to find a way to finish with a smile on your face, no matter what the results. It's the process that matters far more than the results, even though we think the results matter the most. PR team member Marissa Bell described her challenge with results-based thinking. Not getting a PR after putting in all the work and preparing the best I could is tough, she said. I know race day conditions, weather, and life, things out of my control, can impact the results, but the disappointment is still there. And every year I'm a year older, wondering if my chances are slipping away, if I've wasted a year. Yet every time I get back at it, I keep pushing, keep working hard, because the goal is still worth chasing. Now, I would argue it's the chase itself that matters more than the goal, because I've seen Marissa Bell hit her goals before, and she'll just go ahead and set a new one to chase. Sure, hitting a dream race feels amazing, but relying on results to justify the amount of hard work you need to do to reach those goals is setting yourself up for failure. Instead, find a way to appreciate the grind of training, the satisfaction of making yourself a better person every day. During a race, find a way to celebrate all the mini wins, like nailing your fueling or not starting out too fast. These are the things that will help you be a better racer in the future, because experience is just as important as fitness. Not to mention, you won't be shattered with disappointment when your watch says a number you don't like. Training your brain to embrace frustration, boredom, patience, and being physically uncomfortable is absolutely essential to perform your best. Thankfully, it's something you can work on every time you run, and with practice, it can not only make you a better runner, but a happier one too. Thank you for listening to The Planted Runner, part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Don't forget that you can enter to win a free custom training plan for your next race and get featured on the show. Just write an Apple Podcast review and enter at theplantedrunner.com/PRLab. Of course, reviews are the #1 way to boost this show's reach, and it's a great way to tell me what you'd like to hear next, because I read every single one.
Have a great run today.
Sports stars. They're like superheroes.
But they're actually real.
Which is why we've made a podcast about them. You see,
They've all got a story.
but too many of these stories were cut short.
Kobe Bryant,
Payne Stewart,
Flojo,
Phil Hughes.
Justin Fashanu,
We're writing episodes about all of them.
and sadly many more.
Death of a Sports Star, a new series from Crowd Network.